Welcome to POSFest 2020.
Thank you.
There's a bit of a delay. I'm just going to introduce you, so I just want to say hello first, and then we're going to jump into FAANG. Love the word, FAANG. All eyes on the November 2020 US presidential election. Will Donald Trump be given 4 more years to disrupt traditional norms of governance? Or will one of his many challengers from the Democratic side of the fence unseat his vice-like hold on White House power? South by Southwest Chief Programming Officer Hugh Forrest gives us a short overview of what is at stake in this election for Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, and other tech giants. And I just want to introduce you, Hugh, now. Hugh Forrest serves as a Chief Programming Officer for South by Southwest. He was named Austintine of the Year in 2012 by Austin Chamber of Commerce, along with fellow South by Southwest directors Ronald Swenson, Louis Black, and Nick Barbaro. In 2014, Forrest and these others South by Southwest directors were named Austin Entrepreneurs of the Year by Ernst & Young. He's recently received an honorary doctorate of Humane Letters from Kenyon College. In addition to his work to South by Southwest, he previously served on the National Advisory Board of Poynter Institute in St. Petersburg, Florida. Hugh is currently part of the board of directors for Austin Habitat for Humanity, and he also serves the board of directors for the Austin-based accessibility company Nobility. Hugh, how are you? How is Texas?
I am good. It is a little bit late in Texas, but I'm way excited to be with you guys and share whatever small insights I have on this thing we call the election.
Yeah, it's just a small thing.
Something like that.
It's not a big deal.
Maybe so, maybe no.
Yeah. So it's really important time that we live in. There's a lot going on, not just in US, but across in UK and all around the world. But we're going to focus now just for the US and the tech giants. And yeah, I would like you to take off and tell us what do you think, how will these elections influence the tech giants and therefore influence the entire planet collectively? Because this is not just a US thing, this is a pretty much of a global sort of thing.
All right. Let's do it. You ready?
We're ready.
Wonderful.
There's a lot of people here, by the way.
Good morning, folks. Again, my name is Hugh Forrest. I am the Chief Programming Officer at South by Southwest in Austin, Texas, USA. If you want to connect with me at any time to ask me questions about South by Southwest, to tell me how much you disagree with my opinions or other pleasantries, you can connect with me at hugh@sxsw.com. Via the Twitters, I am at Hugh_W_Forrest. And speaking of opinions, this morning I'm here via the magic of Zoom technology to talk to you again about FAANG and the 2020 US presidential election. I think we'll go for about 20 minutes, and perhaps we'll have a few minutes for questions, reflections, ideas. After that, we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, we have, sorry to interrupt, we have 10 minutes and there's a Slido that we use, so I'll collect the questions and we'll ask you.
Sounds great. So thanks for inviting me to speak today at POSFest. It's a huge honor to be here, if only virtually again. I've been following POSFest online for the last few days, and it seems like the event has been a great success again this year. I so wish that I could be there in person. However, at 40 days away from South by Southwest, it's unfortunately impossible to escape Austin. I also want to express how concerned we are in the US at the ravages of the wildfires. We have watched in horror at the destruction of these flames, although I know that what we can see in the US by television, by the internet, pales in comparison to the experience you all have of living through these infernos. Again, our thoughts and prayers and good wishes and positive vibes are very much with your country as you go through these incredibly difficult times. At PauseFest, so last February at PauseFest, I talked about the concept of techlash. A year later, I think a lot of people are more familiar with that term and how it characterizes our current love-hate relationship with many of the devices and the gadgets and the machines that power our lives. But if you're not familiar by chance with techlash, let me give you a brief explanation. Techlash is a term that's been popularized by a lot of different pundits. Probably the pundit at the top of that list in terms of popularizing this term is Kara Swisher from Recode, who has really pushed the usage of this word over the last 18 months. I think techlash is this idea that 10, 15, 20 years ago, we were promised that the innovations of the technology revolution would improve everything. Techlash reflects that, unfortunately, these wild promises about a much better future have fallen far short of reality. I think techlash also reflects the even sharper disillusionment that occurs when all the computational power has been consolidated amongst so few companies. This wasn't the way we thought the distributed nature of the internet would work. Said in its starkest and most brutal terms, the increased popularity of this techlash mindset reflects the idea that technology, and particularly social media, has actually decreased the quality of our lives, and that we need to view technology, and again, particularly social media, as something that is damaging to our overall health and well-being in roughly the same ways that tobacco, excessive alcohol, or air pollution are detrimental to a healthy lifestyle. So there you go on what techlash means. Happy term, isn't it? Is this concept a little bit unfair? Yes, absolutely it is, because it's incredibly hard to argue that technology has not improved our lives in many tangible and many significant ways. But I think it's also hard to argue that these improvements have not come at a fairly high cost. As I talked about in my presentation last year at PauseFest, I think the watershed event for the techlash movement, for the techlash understanding, came with the Cambridge Analytica scandal, i.e. revelations of the extent to which our own social media data could be manipulated against us by computers and algorithms to dramatically influence our thinking. And even more than just our thinking, this technology backlash reflects the understanding that companies like Cambridge Analytica could dramatically influence the way we vote. Indeed, the innovations, quote unquote, of Cambridge Analytica had a huge impact on the 2016 election and the ascendancy of Donald Trump, TV reality star, to leader of the free world. I could go much more into detail on techlash, but that's not really the focus of today's talk. What is more central to the focus of today's talk is how techlash has directly led to one of the most memorable acronyms of our generation, FAANG. If we want to be completely technical in analyzing the rise of FAANG, of this FAANG acronym, then we have to point out that the acronym is a little more than inaccurate. What I mean here is that Netflix is a very powerful company, and it is a company that has radically changed our culture in terms of how we receive and digest entertainment content. It has undoubtedly done that. But Netflix is certainly not nearly as powerful a company as Microsoft. So in a more perfect world, it would be FAAMG. But if you swap out those letters, you have, again, FAANG, which doesn't particularly make any sense, or GAMFA, which isn't particularly memorable either. Memorable is absolutely the key concept here. In the age of red, Make America Great Again baseball caps, acronyms that easily stick are extremely important. All the better if the acronym sounds like a word that ties into the underlying message of the component parts. In this particular case, this analysis of the meaning and the underlying message is certainly not too hard to decipher. A term that we usually associate with sharp and menacing teeth, FAANG is not a nice word, nor is it a benevolent word. It is a word that expresses, it is not a word that expresses happiness or warmth or goodwill or compassion. Instead, it's a word that projects aggression and anger and violence and ill will and possessiveness. And unfortunately, in this age of techlash, these are the words that describe how many of us interpret the motivations of these 5 giant global tech companies. Again, the interpretation goes as follows: Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Microsoft, however you want to phrase that, and Google aren't changing the world for the better. Instead, so many people now feel that these 5 giant companies are actively projecting aggression and anger and violence and ill will and making our planet much, much worse as a result. So this not too positive concept of FAANG serves as the foil for today's presentation about 8 of the top 2020 US presidential candidates and where they stand on the issue of imposing tighter regulations on these huge global corporations. Before we move forward with this analysis of these 8 candidates, I also want to try to be as crystal clear as possible on where I stand on this concept of FAANG. I personally use and enjoy products developed by all 5 of these FAANG companies, as I'm sure most of the people in the room do. Professionally, South by Southwest has been very proud to showcase the innovation and expertise of speakers from all 5 of these 5 companies. These 5 companies employ and indeed cultivate some of the world's most brilliant minds. Professionally, South by Southwest has also been the beneficiary of significant investments in terms of trade show activations, other purchases from these 5 FAANG companies. But all these large benefits aside, it frustrates me that so much power has become consolidated in so few companies. In my mind, that kind of consolidation is not the best scenario for massive innovation, nor is it what we signed up for when we signed on to this digital revolution. With massive innovation as the North Star for the future, I personally believe that the next US president needs to take some very dramatic steps to limit the power and scope of these companies. Those dramatic steps, does the concept of dramatic steps mean treating these FAANG companies like unfair monopolies and acting accordingly with a new set of rules and regulations that acknowledge these realities? In my mind, yes, it does. So that is what I think about FAANG, but who cares about my opinions? What is important today is, what do the 2020 presidential candidates think? And here's my spoiler to that question. Over the next 15 minutes or so, I'm not going to argue that any of the candidates for 2020 are in a position to radically change or alter FAANG. I think I had that optimistic outlook when George and I first started talking about this speech 6 months ago, that the candidates might have some power to change FAANG, but unfortunately that optimism has faded a little, and that these important tech issues and concerns have generally taken a backseat in the ongoing primary process. And I can't see that changing a lot in the next few months or in the lead up to November. More specifically, the idea of breaking up or regulating big tech is incredibly complicated, and complicated doesn't necessarily play well on the campaign trail. The idea of breaking up or regulating big tech is also fraught with political danger, since so many of these candidates are depending on big money donations, and these big money donations more and more come from the high wealth individuals in the tech sector. So again, having given you this spoiler alert, the FAANG companies don't have too much to worry about. The rest of my speech will cover how 8 of the most viable candidates are in some way, big or small, addressing the challenges of our current large technology ecosystem. Over the course of the next few minutes, I will also include various tidbits related to technology and the given candidate, in hopes that it gives us a little more information on what kind of tech-related policies the given candidate might actually pursue if he or she makes it to the White House by the November 2020 election. So the first tidbit related to technology ties into what we saw in Iowa earlier this week. If you're not familiar with this situation, let me give you a brief recap. Monday, February 3rd was the first primary of the 2020 election season in a smallish state in the Midwestern part of the United States called Iowa. What happens in terms of voting in the state is a little more complicated than other states, because the way that Iowa structures their caucus, it allows for second and third choice candidates. Unfortunately, that phrase, a little more complicated, turned out to be a lot more complicated. There are massive technical problems in the Iowa caucus in terms of the voting counts on the evening of February 3rd. 4 days later, we still don't know the final results. It's a mess. In many ways, the technology snafus within this Iowa primary serve as the perfect metaphor for the current problem. Once again, the next generation tools that were supposed to make things a lot simpler, faster, better, end up backfiring and delaying results extensively. Again, I return to this problem of technology not living up to the hype, and in fact creating outcomes that are significantly worse than what were designed, than what they were designed to improve. The ongoing techlash theme returns again and again and again. But beyond these tech problems for the Iowa primary, what was also particularly surprising was the outcome. And within the context that the votes are not completely finalized yet, the winner of the Iowa primary appears to be a gentleman named Mayor Pete. I'm particularly proud of his success in Iowa and his success in this primary, because he was one of our biggest success stories at South by Southwest 2019. We were lucky enough to have, I think, 7 presidential candidates at South by Southwest 2019. And in many ways, Mayor Pete was our biggest startup success story last March. At the beginning of the month, at the beginning of March 2019, he was roughly at 1% polling. By the end of the month, he was at 5% polling. He got a big, big push out of South by Southwest. Again, he may have been the biggest startup success story at South by Southwest 2019. Mayor Pete very much fulfills this outsider narrative, this allure of the outsider, which is always popular in American politics, and I presume popular in Australian politics also. Again, mayor of a small town, gay and married to another man, but also comes from, also served in the military and seems deeply religious. He has also carved out a place that is fairly middle of the road on a lot of issues. He comes off as sensible, but not too far left. He comes off as very compassionate. And again, that played particularly well in Iowa, helped him win the thing, or looks like he won the thing. And there is a strong history of people who win in Iowa going on and getting the Democratic nomination. There is a bit, I shall say a bit, of the Obama mystique within Mayor Pete. I said he was middle of the road on his general stances. He is also generally middle of the road on his approach to FAANG. Mayor Pete has argued that before we can even contemplate breakups of the tech company, enforcers at the Federal Trade Commission and Department of Justice need to be better empowered. That may mean more resources, staff, or statutory authority. We're going to need to empower the FTC to be able to intervene, including blocking or reversing mergers in cases where there's anti-competitive behavior by tech companies. In other words, a kind of middle of the road political statement that works pretty well for Mayor Pete. Let's move on to another candidate who was at South by Southwest 2019. This is Andrew Yang. He is certainly the most tech-centric of the Democratic field of primary candidates. He is the only candidate from the West Coast. You probably recognize San Francisco in the background of this photo. His initial entry into the race was his support for this idea of universal basic income, which is this idea that when the machines take over all the jobs, we will give humans some kind of income on which to survive. This idea has been popularized by a lot of people, but has a lot of critics also. Andrew Yang is also very eloquent and very passionate about the impact and effects of artificial intelligence. His understanding of these technical issues has made him very popular with younger voters. Again, as I mentioned earlier, he was also a speaker at South by Southwest 2019, but I will say that we completely underestimated how much lasting impact he would have. We didn't put him on a big stage. We had him in a smaller room because we thought he was a flash in the pan candidate. In fact, he's had fairly strong lasting power and is still in the race. Interestingly enough, as supportive as he is on universal basic income, he is not necessarily supportive of breaking up the big tech companies. Yang said during an interview with The Rising in June 2019 that dismantling tech giants like Facebook, which owns Instagram and WhatsApp, wouldn't fix the negative effects they're having on teenagers and young people. He added that breaking up major tech firms is a 20th century solution to a 21st century problem. Do I think that Andrew Yang has a chance for the Democratic nomination? No, but I do think it will be fascinating where he throws his support over the next few weeks, few months when he pulls out of the race and how that impacts the overall lineup. That leads us into Elizabeth Warren, who also spoke at South by Southwest 2019. We had an event called Conversations About America's Future, where we had many of these candidates. Elizabeth Warren used her opportunity to speak at South by Southwest to launch this broadside attack on big tech, where she came out with a very detailed plan on how she would break up FAANG. If nothing else, it was incredibly ballsy of her to go into a tech conference and talk to a tech crowd about how they should all be broken up and divided into smaller companies. Her feeling is that breaking up the tech companies would result in these giant tech companies would result in lots of smaller companies that could be more innovative. I think there's a lot of interesting portions of that idea to run with. and her thoughts on this breaking up tech are one of the things that led her to this to be named the policy person last spring and in the summer. That she had the smartest policies, the most thought out policies. That said, she's largely pivoted from a focus on policies, and she has gained more popularity by embracing various other things. That's probably good for her because the tech industry is incredibly scared of what she represents, and I think would actively work against her were she to get the nomination. She did not do so great in the Iowa caucus. That said, the next caucus is New Hampshire. She's from Massachusetts. She should have a much better advantage there. Again, she has the most ambitious plan for breaking up FAANG, and that has created lots of challenges for her. We'll see how that works. Also speaking at South by Southwest 2019, Senator Amy Klobuchar, she also wants to see big tech reformed, but not nearly as outspoken on this topic as Elizabeth Warren. Instead, Klobuchar has offered a separate option to tax tech companies when they either exploit, sell, or give user data to third-party sources. The plan wasn't fully fleshed out at South by Southwest. She's fleshed out a little more than. It's similar to digital services tax that has a digital services tax that has been discussed by the European Union. In October, the UK Chancellor announced a 2% tax on the revenues of companies like Amazon, Facebook, and Google. So again, she is a little bit in favor of a stronger reforms on the big tech companies, but not fully embracing of that. We'll then segue to Vice President Joe Biden, who may have been the big loser in the Iowa caucus. He has been the prominent or preeminent front runner throughout the last few months, was certainly the subject of the ongoing impeachment inquiry, but came in fourth in the Iowa caucus. So he needs to rebound significantly in the New Hampshire caucus, or he will be quickly to depart. Vice President Biden did not speak at South by Southwest in 2019. He did speak in 2016 about the cancer moonshot. Vice President Biden has taken a fairly middle-of-the-road approach on breaking up the tech companies. In a May 2019 interview, he said that splitting up tech companies such as Facebook was something we should take a really hard look at, but it was premature to make a final judgment. I'll also say that one of my enduring memories of Joe Biden is a debate over the summer where he could not remember his campaign's URL, and in some ways that sums up his vagueness on this issue. All that said, 2 weeks ago, Biden came out and called for the overhaul of Section 230. This is the Communications Act in the US that essentially empowers internet companies. Very controversial for him to call for that. And so that is very, very interesting that he called for that. Bernie Sanders, here speaking at South by Southwest 2018, he is probably the most internet-centric of the candidates. His bottom-up approach is what has powered his campaign, and bottom-up approach meaning soliciting thousands of small donations from small donors as opposed to big donations. Again, that is a very internet-centric approach. His campaign has strong ties to the Move On organization from approximately 15 years ago. It also has some of the negative aspects of the internet in terms of the Bernie Bros. He is very much like Elizabeth Warren in terms of thinking that the tech companies should be broken up, although it has not been quite the centerpiece of the campaign as it was for Elizabeth Warren. He said earlier this winter, he said, when I am in the White House, I will reinvigorate the FTC and appoint an attorney general who will aggressively investigate and break up these tech giants and other conglomerates that have monopolized nearly every sector of our economy. Corporate giants control too much of what we see, we hear, and read online, and must be subjected to regulation and antitrust authority. Okay, so we go from bottom up to top down. Michael Bloomberg, maybe a top-down approach isn't completely dead yet. He is another disruptor of this old traditional ineffective election system, and that he's largely skipping the traditional primary system. He's using $400 million of his own money to flood television with advertisements, and that's actually begun to get some traction. Again, this is top-down versus bottom-up, so maybe that internet model hasn't completely taken over everything. He is certainly against breaking up FAANG. Again, his quote here is that breaking things up just to be nasty is not an answer. He recently told the Bay Area News Group, you've got to be a good reason how it worked, and I don't hear that from anybody, Senator Sanders or anyone else. So again, Bloomberg very much in favor of the status quo with its tech companies, insofar as he is a disruptor of the overall campaign system, which brings us to the ultimate disruptor, Donald Trump. No one has ever used Twitter more effectively than the current president, and it certainly pains me to say that because Twitter launched at South by Southwest, and in some ways I feel our event is somewhat responsible for this person that has been inflicted upon the world. So there, Trump, again, I'm not a fan of Trump. I think that he is not particularly intelligent on most issues, although you've got to give him, again, credit that he understands the media in a way that few other people do. From a tech standpoint, there are two words you need to know when thinking about Donald Trump versus FAANG. That is Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel is one of his biggest advisors. The current chief technology officer in the White House is a former Peter Thiel assistant. Peter Thiel has said that breaking up the tech companies would play into the hands of the Chinese. So as much as Donald Trump has complained that the tech companies are too left-leaning and discriminate against Republicans like himself, I don't see any scenario where he has any appetite for breaking up the tech companies. Ironically, and in the context of FAANG, Trump, the president, is kind of like Facebook, the company. And by that, I mean, despite all his many scandals and problems, the stock continues to grow and grow and grow. And that stock being the economy, and the economy being what powers his presidency. Okay, quickly summarizing here this FAANG scoreboard. We went over 8 candidates who I feel are most viable, including obviously President Trump. 2 are in favor of breaking up FAANG, Warren and Sanders. 3 of them don't have any appetite for breaking up FAANG. That is Mayor Bloomberg, Andrew Yang, and President Trump. Somewhere in the middle are Mayor Pete, Amy Klobuchar, and Biden. What this all adds up to is FAANG probably stays intact. Again, sorry if I disillusioned you or misled you that I thought this was all going to change. 5 key FAANG takeaways to think about in today's presentation. First and foremost, the US economy is strong and tech powers the economy. The strength of the economy is what will get Trump reelected if he gets reelected. And again, it all ties back to the power of the tech economy. Tech policy is also not particularly candidate friendly. It is confusing. It is complicated. It is complicated all the more so because the tech industry is traditionally has a left bent to it. But the fact that it has created so much wealth has in fact turned that on its head and made it a little more Republican leaning. third point here in terms of FAANG, the wave of disruption continues. That is the wave that started with Donald Trump, continues with people like Michael Bloomberg, and will probably continue again in the 2020 election. Fourth thing to think about here, tech problems such as we have seen in Iowa have diminished overall election confidence. And of course, I'm also talking about tech problems in the 2016 election with probable Russian interference. This all adds up to hard to imagine FAANG weakening in the near future. Last but not least, it's not necessarily a prediction, and I'm not necessarily good at predictions, but I'm still bullish on Bernie as a potential Democratic candidate. I'm not sure if we have time for questions because that went a little bit long, but again, you can always email me, hugh@sxsw.com. If you have a chance to make it over to Austin, South by Southwest is March 13th through 22nd of this year. If you're interested in speaking next March in Austin, we start accepting speaking proposals in July 2020 by the panel picker. George, that's me. Do you have any questions before you go on to much more interesting topics?
I think we can extend this to another half an hour with questions, probably an hour, but we are like 3 minutes before next session. So I'm just going to ask you one very quick question. Do you think the big tech should be broken down or not?
That's a question for me or for the audience?
For you, and then I'll ask our audience too. Audience, who thinks it should be broken? A few, and all of you are not. So mostly not.
Mostly not. Wow.
Yeah.
I think that we have to be cognizant that tech has changed from being this underdog, cool little startups, Google in a garage 15 years ago, to Google controlling almost everything in 2020. The rules or that landscape is different, and we have to act accordingly. I'm not sure if we fully break up these companies and the negative consequences there, but I do think we have to have some much stronger regulatory guide rails on these industries, else suffer the consequences. And I also think that again, with this idea of innovation as the North Star, wouldn't it be cool to have another new wave of Apple, Google, Facebook, Amazon? And the fact that we have these such entrenched and powerful companies now is one of the things that prevents a more significant new wave from breaking through.
Hugh, thank you so much for being here at POSFest. I'm going to leave you with one thing. One of the people from the audience has suggested that maybe perhaps FAANG could be changed to FAANGT, including Twitter and YouTube. So you can think about that over in Texas. Thanks.
Oh, right. Nice. Cheers to that.
FAANGT. It's a startup name. Thanks so much, and thanks for staying and being here. I hope you can possibly join us next year and talk about what has happened in the year that elapsed. So have a great South by Southwest. I'm pretty sure it's going to be fun. Thanks a lot, and we'll have to sort of stop the broadcast now. Thank you.